Between the 27th and the 31st of May 1935, a sensational trial took place at the Old Bailey in London that gripped people's attention. This is Vintage Murders and the true crime story of the murder of the cuckolded architect. Yorkshire-born Francis Rattenbury, a retired 67-year-old architect living in Villa Madeira, 5 Manor Road, Eastcliff in Bournemouth, had been attacked with a mallet on the 6th of April 1935. A day later he died from his injuries. The police surgeon, Dr. Harold Simmons, found the cause of death to be as laceration of and hemorrhage to the brain and into the skull, the result of a compound fracture produced by the injuries. His wife, Alma Rattenbury, and his chauffeur and handyman, George Stoner, were charged with his murder. Understandably, it garnered considerable press attention. But who were these 3 seemingly innocuous people? Francis Rattenbury was an up-and-coming architect in 1892, and at the age of 24 had decided to emigrate to British Columbia in Canada to seek his fortune, and he was not to be disappointed. After setting up his practice, he enjoyed a certain amount of commercial success after winning an open competition to design the province's Parliament building in Victoria. He did commissions for the local law courts and the luxurious Empress Hotel, which we will return to later. He was married and had 2 children. Basically, he was a local pillar of the community. In between these successes, Francis led a roller coaster life. Often ruthless and aggressive in dealing with others, he received little sympathy when failed private business ventures left him short of funds, with only his architectural talent to fall back on to keep him afloat. On the 29th of December 1923, while celebrating the award of an important local contract in the Empress Hotel, the 56-year-old Rattenbury met and fell in love with Alma Pakenham, a divorcee half his age. Once their affair became public knowledge, Rattenbury, then married with 2 children and considered a pillar of local society, was no longer that welcome in Victoria. His architectural practice was in decline and out of fashion for large prestige commissions, and an acrimonious divorce followed, and the newlyweds, together with Alma's son, Christopher Pakenham, finally settled at Villa Madeira in Bournemouth. Alma Rattenbury, his wife, was 29 years old and had certainly had a colourful life prior to meeting her husband. She was born in 1897 in British Columbia and was a talented musician who played with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Her first husband was John Dolling, who she married in 1914. He was a relative of the Earl of Caledon. He had joined the army at the start of World War I and was posted to France in 1915, while she stayed in England working for the War Office. He earned the Military Cross for bravery before being sadly killed in the Battle of the Somme. She then volunteered for the Scottish Women's Hospitals for the Foreign Office and served in France. She was wounded twice and was awarded the Croix de Guerre. In 1918, at the end of the war, she met Thomas Pakenham. He had divorced his wife in 1920, and the couple married in 1921 and set off for the United States. He worked as a lecturer, even though he did not hold a doctorate, while she gave piano lessons. They had a son, but the relationship failed, and they both returned to British Columbia in 1922. They were formally divorced in 1926. But let us return to the Empress Hotel, which was where, on the 29th of December 1923, As a 29-year-old, she met Francis Rattenbury, who was celebrating winning a local contract. They were instantly attracted to each other, but the two starstruck lovers had two major problems between them. They were still technically married to other people. Francis banished his wife to the top floor, whilst living in sin with Alma in the rest of the house. This caused a scandal in Canadian society, and the couple decided to try their luck back home in England. Hence the move eventually to Bournemouth. In 1929 she had a second son with Francis, but the marriage became a strained one, and the couple lived in different rooms on different floors. Francis was now drinking heavily, and would polish off a bottle of whisky each night. Villa Madeira was quite small, yet had to accommodate the Rattenburys, the 6-year-old John, who came home from boarding school at the weekend, the older half-brother, the 13-year-old Christopher, who stayed during holidays, and the live-in housemaid called Miss Irene Biggs. The Great Depression was gathering pace, and Francis was beset with money worries. Quarrels now regularly broke out, and Alma was once seen sporting a black eye. To make things worse, she was a vivacious lady, while Francis had difficulty making new friends, and only really had a barrister buddy in Bridport, of which more later. If the truth be told, a lot of people were in the same boat, daring not to have any more children whilst depression lasted, and turning to drink for solace. And so the sad situation was to continue, until an advertisement was placed in the Bournemouth Echo on the 26th of September 1934 for a daily willing lad, 14 to 18, for housework, scout trained preferred. George Stoner answered the advertisement, and as he had worked in a garage and had come of age to drive, he was appointed both chauffeur and handyman. He was a simple, handsome local boy who was shy with girls. Apart from that, an unremarkable character. For the first few months he worked from home, but came to live in the house from November. It was, however, suspected that George and Alma had become lovers at this stage. Francis Rattenbury was often depressed and suicidal, and he took refuge in a nightly bottle of whisky. He slept on his own downstairs, and appears not to have objected to his wife's affair. In such a small house, it is almost inconceivable that he did not know what was going on. For her part, Alma, still attractive and hoping to enhance her blossoming career as a songwriter, was caught in a dreary domestic situation. Given the size of the house, and Stoner's regular trips each night to Alma's bedroom, it is hardly surprising that Irene Biggs, the live-in maid, found out about this arrangement. In addition, the family doctor, Dr. O'Donnell, was also told about it. He was described by Mr. Justice Humphreys as not of a nice character, but this did not tie in with the views of Irene Biggs or Dr. O'Donnell, who described him as a quiet, pleasant man whose finances worried him and whose emotional relationships had also disappointed. This world of the chauffeur and his lover was starting to unravel, as instead of just going to his mistress's bedroom in secret, both of them were to go on a 5-day excursion to London in early 1935 and stayed at the Royal Palace Hotel in Kensington. Alma was able to persuade her husband to lend her the money under the pretext of some minor operation. There, they claimed to be brother and sister, and spent the day shopping and seeing the sights. Among items bought for him were silk pyjamas and a made-to-measure suit. For the son of a labourer, this must have been heady stuff, especially as he was referred to Sir by the staff. But emotions were beginning to boil over, as we had a twice-married woman who was nearly 40 using an inexperienced 18-year-old provincial boy as a sexual toy. It is not difficult to see the stoner was becoming jealous of anyone who he believed was a rival to the love of his life, and that he was the person who was the master of the house. Alma was playing a very dangerous game here. When the adulterous couple returned to Bournemouth on Friday, Frederick was in a depressive mood, as he was waiting for a commission for some flats. He even talked about suicide. To cheer him up, Alma suggested she ring his barrister friend, Mr. Jenks at Bridport, who was delighted for them to come on Monday and stay the night. Stoner overheard this conversation, and on entering Alma's bedroom, confronted her with this news and an air pistol, which she thought was a revolver. He threatened to kill her if she went to Bridport. Eventually, she pacified him after telling him that Francis and Alma stayed in separate bedrooms on visiting Mr. Jenks. Things were getting out of hand. That night, Stoner went for dinner with his grandparents and borrowed from them a carpenter's mallet. On the evening of the 24th of March 1934, on the night before the trip to Bridport, Alma went to bed at 9:30 p.m. after giving her husband his whiskey bottle. Stoner followed his nightly ritual to her bedroom, but was highly agitated. He told her that he had hurt Francis, a comment which she did not take seriously. All this changed when she heard her husband groaning, and she ran downstairs to discover him slumped on his chair and a pool of blood on the floor. Dr. O'Donnell was called and realised that his patient was in a serious condition, and ordered Stoner to drive Francis and himself to the local hospital. He was pronounced dead the following day. It was revealed at the hospital that his injury was caused by external factors and not self-inflicted, and the police were called. In the meantime, Alma was drinking heavily. On their arrival at 2 o'clock in the morning, the police saw an intoxicated woman playing the gramophone and all the lights switched on. A P.C. Bagwell cautioned Alma and heard the following confession. "I did it with a mallet. Francis has lived too long. It is hidden. No, my lover did it." At 4 a.m, Dr. O'Donnell returned to the house and gave her half a gram of morphine to make her sleep. The next day, Detective Inspector Carter was present when Alma awoke. She signed a statement that contained the following. At about 9 p.m. on Sunday, 24th of March 1935, I was playing cards with my husband when he dared me to kill him, as he wanted to die. I picked up the mallet. He then said, "You have not got the guts enough to do it." I then hit him with the mallet. I hid the mallet outside the house. I would have shot him if I had a gun. Later, the mallet had been found with George Stoner's fingerprints on it, and confronted with this evidence, he confessed to the murder. The scene was now set for a double trial of the two lovers at the Old Bailey for the murder of Francis Rattenbury. George Stoner refused to go into the witness box and told his solicitor that he had done it under the influence of cocaine. He described the drug as black, which rather undermined his defence. Alma's prospects looked very bleak, although she put up a robust defence. Juries would have been aware of an earlier case where an older woman had induced a man to knife her husband by writing love letters to him, telling that she was going to grind up glass and feed it to the victim. Alma had to go into the witness box and throw herself at the mercy of the court. The jury were told the sordid details of her affair, in which she revealed that her paramour would creep into her bedroom and make love to her whilst her 6-year-old son slept in another bed. The trip to London was described by the judge as an orgy in Kensington, rather than a glorified shopping trip. She could hardly buy these items in Bournemouth. But where was the motive? In Alma's case, there were no love letters or diaries to indicate that she was besotted with Stoner. In today's parlance, he would have been dismissed as her toy boy. Let us go back to her confessions to the police. The first occurred on the night of the murder, in which an intoxicated woman, suffering from shock, could not be relied upon to give a credible account of the night's events. She had sobered up after a good night's sleep, induced by the morphine. The defence were able to argue that people could converse normally whilst on morphine, but the withdrawal of morphine can induce hallucinations. The jury, after due deliberations, found Alma not guilty, but George Stoner guilty, as he was the only one of the two to be involved. Perhaps in a jealous rage, he had only wanted to harm Frances enough to stop the trip to Bridport, but had gone too far. The judge had no alternative but to sentence him to death by hanging. Alma was booed by the crowd as she left the Old Bailey. Public sympathy had been with Stoner, who it looked like had been led astray by a much older woman. A few days later, Alma took a train from Waterloo to Christchurch. She walked across the fields until she reached the Three Arches Bridge over the River Avon. After writing some notes beside the river, she walked to the water's edge, plunged a knife into her heart, killing herself instantly, and collapsed into the river. Being a musician, she had written a song whilst in prison awaiting trial, indicating her love for George Stoner. He in turn broke down on hearing of her death. It is interesting to note that she used a knife rather than the usual female method of poisoning. Why did she get mixed up with this fellow? We can only speculate. Possibly he reminded her of her first husband, a genuine Great War hero, and part of that doomed generation. But she was a twice-divorced woman, and not getting any younger, whilst he was a callow provincial youth in his prime. At the end of the day, it was never going to work. The public felt that Stoner had been led astray by a conniving older woman, and a plea for mercy to the Home Secretary garnered over 320,000 signatures. He eventually was sentenced to life imprisonment and served only 7 years. He was released in 1942 and joined the forces and took part in D-Day. He died in Christchurch Hospital in 2000 at the age of 83, exactly on the 65th anniversary of France's murder.